Welcome to Lair the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. On today's episode, 5 unsung heroes in rock and metal. These are the guys in the bands that when you think of these bands, you don't typically think of these people first. Usually there's somebody else in the band, a front man or a guitar player or both that's, what takes center stage. But these are people that are really important to the sound of the band and just to the overall creative process in these bands. And I don't think that they sort of get the attention that I think that they deserve. All right, so I've got 5 of them here. My first one is from Queen, John Deacon, the bass player. John Deacon, if you saw the Freddie Mercury movie, they kind of portrayed John Deacon as like this guy that he's just there, like he doesn't contribute anything. There's even a line in it where Freddie says something to John. He's saying something to all the other guys, like negative to all the other guys, complaining or something, and he looks at John and he goes, "And I don't have anything to say about you," or something, like in this sort of way, like you don't matter to this thing. And it couldn't be further from the truth. For one thing, John and Freddie were very close, and a lot of people don't realize this, but John Deacon, he wrote some of Queen's biggest hits. He wrote, for instance, on this Greatest Hits record, he wrote Another One Bites the Dust. That's one of their biggest hits. He wrote You're My Best Friend. That's a huge hit here in America. I Want to Break Free. That was a huge hit over in Europe. He wrote that. Spread Your Wings. Fantastic. One of my favorite Queen songs. And a bunch of other songs that he wrote, like the intro to Under Pressure, that little bass thing, that's John. And plus, he's a fantastic bass player. If you listen to his stuff, he's he sort of gets forgotten about because you have Freddie Mercury, one of the greatest singers of all time. Brian May is a super unique guitar player. Roger Taylor is a great drummer. But John Deacon, he has some great bass lines, very creative stuff. The Millionaire's Waltz off of A Day at the Races, is just, his playing is fantastic. The song Play the Game, I always loved his bass line in that song. He always had a great bass tone. So in my opinion, he's an underrated hero. All right, let's see, I got next here. 4, I just realized this, 4 out of the 5 guys are bass players. So maybe that says something. Bass players, I'm a bass player. Bass players, guys, sort of in the background, but they're still important to the band. All right, Michael Anthony from Van Halen. Well, when you got David Lee Roth in the band, Eddie Van Halen, the greatest guitar player of all time, it's easy to understand how it's hard to carve out your space, to get people to recognize you. But Michael's a good bass player. I think that, maybe his bass sound on some of the early records could have been a little bit better. But for me, the big important thing about Michael is his background vocals. His background vocals are a huge part of the Van Halen sound. I mean, they're almost, in my opinion, as identifiable as much of a trademark to the Van Halen sound as Eddie's guitar or David Lee Roth's voice. I mean, it really is the Van Halen vocal sound to me, is Michael Anthony's background vocals, because he sings a lot. And when you see live clips of Van Halen from the David Lee Roth era, I mean, it's almost like more than half the time, it's like Michael Anthony singing and carrying a lot of the loads. So he just had a big part in the Van Halen sound, but it just sometimes sort of gets overlooked. All right, let's try to break up the bass player thing here. I think a lot of people know this one now, especially with his passing, but Malcolm Young. Angus, he's like the front man of the band in a lot of ways. Bon, Brian Johnson, 2 great singers, great frontmen. But as everybody, people who are fans of ACDC know, Malcolm was really the brains behind the band. And he was the guy that creatively drove the band, was the guy that when anybody else had does this song work? Is this song good enough? Malcolm was the guy that said, okay, this is good, or we can do this, or we should do this. He was really sort of the creative brains behind the band with the songwriting and the direction of the band. I think too, I saw a video of it was like a behind the scenes making of Back in Black, and I can't remember if it was Malcolm talking or it might have been Mutt Lange or somebody saying that "You Shook Me All Night Long" originally the vocal line was like, "She was a fast machine, da 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 da. She kept the motor clean." You know, it was like half the speed. There were these big gaps in the vocals in the verse, and Malcolm came in and heard it and was like, "No, no way! It's got to be. She was a fast machine. She kept the motor clean. She was a, you know, it has to be just like that." And you think about it, I mean, and Mutt Lange or whoever was being interviewed said as soon as they did that, the whole song, you know, fell into place. And you know, Angus always credits, you know, Malcolm as being the guy that, you know, he always looked to him for like, okay, is this working? Is this cool? Is this good? You know, so I think people recognize this now with his passing, but you know, through time, all the attention was always on Angus and whoever, you know, Brian or Bon. All right, we're back to bass players. Ozzy Osbourne and his bass player Bob Daisley. Bob Daisley. A lot of people don't realize this, but Bob Daisley, he played bass on Blizzard of Oz, Diary of a Madman. The Diary of a Madman record, on the inner sleeve, it has Rudy Sarzo and Tommy Aldridge pictured, and it says Rudy Sarzo on bass on Diary of a Madman. That's not true. That's Bob Daisley. He played on Bark at the Moon. He didn't play on Ultimate Sin, but we'll get back to that in a second. He played bass on No Rest for the Wicked, and he even played bass on No More Tears. Even though, like in those videos, he's not in that, he played bass on that album. Now, the other important thing about Bob is he was very influential in the writing department of the band. And he wrote all the lyrics for Ozzy on Blizzard, Diary, Bark at the Moon, Ultimate Sin. A lot of people don't realize this. Phil Sassone played bass on that record, but Bob Daisley was involved in the writing process of that album and wrote those lyrics. No Rest for the Wicked, he wrote the lyrics and was involved in the songwriting on that. Now, No More Tears, he came in at the last minute. He wasn't involved in the songwriting there. He only played bass on that. But Bob had a huge part in, you know, wrote, involved in the writing in all those records and wrote all those lyrics. So, and he's a guy that unfortunately, I'm sorry, a lot of people have heard this story. He had legal arguments with, you know, legal things with the Osbournes over unpaid royalties, and there's been all this bad blood. And Bob just sort of, and also Lee Kerslake, who sadly passed away not that long ago, and played drums on those first two Ozzy solo records. But him and Bob have just been sort of erased from the Osbourne history, which is just so unfair. You often see Ozzy say, well, when me and Randy wrote Blizzard of Oz, well, yeah, when you, Randy, and Bob wrote Blizzard of Oz, you know, Bob had a big part in all those records that I mentioned that he was involved with. If you want to learn more about Bob Daisley, he has a book called For Fact's Sake, which is excellent, and he talks about all these things and all the bands that he's been in and stuff. All right, another bass player. This is the Led Zeppelin BBC box set here, and where is he? Here he is, John Paul Jones from Led Zeppelin. Again, another case of when you got Jimmy Page in the band, such an amazing guitar player, when you got Robert Plant, John Bonham, you know, it's hard to stand out when you've got such strong personalities and people. But John Paul Jones is an amazing, amazing musician, and not only is he a fantastic bass player, he came before Led Zeppelin. He was a studio musician, a first call studio guy. He played organ and bass on recordings. He did arrangements, string arrangements, horn arrangements. I mean, he's an incredible musician. And so not only you get his great bass playing on the Led Zeppelin records, you get his piano playing and his organ playing like a no quarter and stuff like that, Stairway to Heaven, his arrangements like in Kashmir, those strings that you hear, that's John Paul Jones, the flute sounds at the beginning of Stairway to Heaven, that's John Paul Jones. And he also, as the band went on and got more into like acoustic type things, he would play the mandolin and acoustic instruments, and you hear that all over, like Led Zeppelin 3, Led Zeppelin 4. So John Paul Jones was a big part of the Led Zeppelin sound. He's just sort of a guy that doesn't get mentioned a lot when people are talking about Led Zeppelin. All right, there you go. There's 5 unsung heroes here. I could have put a bunch of other people too, but let me know some of yours. Somehow a lot of them landed up being bass players, but I'm sure there's others out there, drummers and guitar players and stuff like that. So let me know some people who you think are kind of unsung, overlooked people in bands and in rock and metal, and let me know in the comments down below. Till we see you again, make sure you stay heavy, stay metal.